why you became the strong one, and what it cost you. There was a moment so early you probably don't remember it, when you understood something no child should have to understand. You understood that if you fell apart, no one was coming to hold the pieces. So you didn't fall apart. You got good at not falling apart, so good that people started to depend on it. Your calm in the middle of their chaos, your steadiness when everyone else's ground was shaking, and somewhere in that pattern, without ever agreeing to it, you became the strong one. Not because you were the strongest, because someone had to be, and it was never going to be anyone else. This is not a story about resilience. Resilience is a word other people use when they admire what it cost you without ever asking about the price. This is about what actually happens inside a person who has spent years being the one who doesn't need anything, while quietly needing everything. You learned to read a room before you learned to read a book. You learned which feelings were safe to have out loud and which had to be managed alone, so no one else had to carry them. You became fluent in everyone else's emotional weather and illiterate in your own. And the world rewarded you for it. It called you mature, dependable, the one who has it together. No one asked what it took to have it together. Here is the truth underneath the compliments. Strength that was never given a choice is not strength. It's adaptation, a nervous system that learned, in a specific room, at a specific age, that needing things was too expensive, so it stopped asking the price. And that adaptation followed you into every relationship, every job, every version of yourself that people now call impressive. This video is not going to tell you to be more resilient. You have been resilient enough for 3 lifetimes. This is going to ask a different question, one you have probably never let yourself sit with for longer than a few seconds before moving on to the next thing someone needed from you. What happened to the part of you that never got to be the one who needed catching? You can list every person who leans on you, the friend who calls at midnight, the family member who only surfaces during a crisis, the colleague who assumes you'll handle it. You know their names instantly. Now try to name the person you call when you are the one drowning. The silence after that question is the whole video. That silence is not an accident. It was built, moment by moment, in rooms where your needs were quietly too much for the people who were supposed to hold them. And once built, it doesn't stay in childhood. It moves into your friendships, your career, the relationship where you are always the one who checks in first, softens first, because needing to be needed feels safer than needing to be loved without earning it. That question is where this begins. The role you never chose. No child sits down and decides to become the strong one. It is never a decision. It is a response, fast, automatic, and completely reasonable given the information available at the time. Somewhere in your early life, something happened that taught your nervous system a single unspoken rule. The adults around me cannot fully hold what I feel, so I will hold it myself. Maybe it was a parent whose emotions took up all the oxygen in the room. Maybe it was a household where chaos was the weather and someone had to be the calm. Maybe it was quieter. A caregiver who was loving but overwhelmed, doing their best with less than you needed. Whatever the shape, the outcome was the same. You looked around, calculated who was available to catch you, and got an answer your body has never forgotten: no one. So you adapted. And the adaptation was brilliant, the way all survival strategies are. You became attuned, capable. You learned to anticipate what people needed before they said it because anticipating was safer than asking and being disappointed. You learned to manage your own distress quietly, without inconveniencing anyone, because your distress had nowhere reliable to go. This is the part almost no one tells you. Competence built from fear looks identical to competence built from confidence. From the outside, no one can see the difference. They just see someone who handles things well. They don't see the constant calculation running underneath. Can I afford to need something right now, or do I need to keep functioning? The role wasn't chosen. It was assigned by circumstance, and you accepted the assignment because the alternative, being the one who falls apart when no one is there to catch it, felt unbearable. A child cannot survive that unbearable feeling for long, so the child finds a way around it. Becoming strong wasn't ambition. It was the only exit available, And once that exit worked, your nervous system filed it away as the solution. Not just for that room, that year, that crisis. For everything after it. Every future relationship where someone might need you to be steady. Every moment where falling apart felt dangerous rather than simply painful. The role you never chose became the role you couldn't imagine putting down. Because putting it down meant returning to that original unbearable feeling of needing something no one was there to give. The strange part is that this adaptation almost never announces itself as fear. It announces itself as identity. You didn't grow up thinking, I am afraid of needing anyone. You grew up thinking, I am the responsible one. I am just built this way. The fear got translated into a personality trait so smoothly that even you stopped questioning where it came from. But here is the question that has to be answered next, because it changes everything about how you understand yourself. If the role was built to survive one specific situation, in one specific room, why does it still feel necessary now, in rooms that are nothing like the one where it started? Why you learn to carry more than your share. The nervous system does not update the moment danger passes. It updates when it receives enough repeated evidence of safety to override the original lesson. And for most people in this role, that evidence never came. The world kept confirming the original rule, again and again, in slightly different costumes. You carried more than your share as a child because someone had to. Then in friendships, because you were the one who remembered birthdays, who noticed when someone went quiet, who showed up with food when a friend was falling apart. Then at work, because you were the one who stayed late, who caught the mistake before it became a crisis, who could be trusted with the thing no one else wanted to hold. Each of these moments looked like a choice. None of them felt like one. Carrying more than your share is not generosity when it is compulsive. Real generosity has an edge, a place where it ends, a version of you that exists outside of what you give. What you built instead was a reflex. The moment you sense someone struggling, some part of you moves before you've decided to. It isn't kindness choosing to act. It's an old system recognizing a familiar shape of danger and doing the only thing it knows how to do to make it stop. And here is the mechanism that keeps it running for decades. Every time you carry the extra weight and things turn out okay, your nervous system doesn't conclude that you were safe. It concludes that carrying the weight is what made you safe. The strategy gets reinforced instead of retired. Instead of learning, I can rest now, you learn, this works, keep doing it. And the role calcifies further into who you believe yourself to be. Which raises the harder question, the one most people who became the strong one spend years avoiding. What happens the first time you feel something too big to manage quietly? And there is no acceptable place to put it. The moment feeling became inconvenient. There was a specific moment. You may not remember the exact day, but your body remembers the shape of it. When you learned that your feelings had a cost to other people, and that cost was too high to keep charging them. Maybe you cried and were told you were being dramatic. Maybe someone whose mood ran the household made it clear without a word that your upset was an inconvenience layered on top of theirs. Maybe no one was ever cruel at all. Maybe it was sadder than that. A parent too depleted to meet you there, so your feeling landed in empty space instead of into someone's arms. Whatever the moment looked like, the lesson underneath was identical. Feeling things out loud makes you a burden. And once that lesson lands, a specific kind of split begins. You don't stop feeling. No one can. What you stop doing is showing it. This is the birth of the performance. Not performance in the dishonest sense, a self built specifically to be presentable, manageable, easy to be around. Underneath it, the actual feeling doesn't disappear. It goes somewhere. It gets rerouted into your body as tension, into your mind as endless analysis, into your relationships as a subtle permanent distance you can't quite name. Here is the insight that reframes everything. You did not become emotionally unavailable because you don't feel deeply. You became emotionally unavailable because you felt too deeply, too early, in an environment that couldn't hold it. And the only way to keep functioning was to build a door between what you felt and what you showed. That door became so automatic that most days you don't notice it closing. Someone asks how you're doing, and the answer arrives already filtered, edited down to something that won't need managing. Fine. Busy. Good. Just tired. Not because you're lying, but because the honest answer never learned how to walk through that door in the first place. Notice how automatic that filtering has become. It doesn't feel like suppression from the inside. It feels like discretion, like not wanting to burden anyone with something small. But the feelings were never small. They were sized down, over and over, until small was the only size that seemed acceptable to hand to another person. So if showing the feeling was inconvenient, what did the people around you reward instead? And what did that reward actually train you to become? Praised into silence. Here is one of the cruelest mechanisms in this entire pattern. You were not punished into becoming the strong one. In most cases, you were praised into it. And praise is so much harder to resist than punishment, because punishment teaches you what to avoid, while praise teaches you who to become. Think about the words that landed on you as a child, and notice how many were compliments. So mature for your age. Such a good helper. You never cause any trouble. Every one of these phrases sounds like admiration. Every one of them was quietly training a child to disappear a little more. This is the trap almost no one talks about, because it doesn't look like harm. When a child is praised for not needing things, for managing their emotions alone, for taking care of others first, that child receives a devastating piece of information disguised as a compliment. Love is available to me, but only for the version of myself that doesn't need anything back. So you optimized for that version. Of course you did. It was the only version that reliably produced warmth. And it worked. People did admire you. They still do. You built a self so competent, so low maintenance that the praise never stopped coming, which meant the signal to change never came either. This is why so many people in this role describe feeling trapped by their own reputation. Once you are known as the reliable one, the one who never falls apart, every moment of struggle carries an additional weight. The fear of disappointing an identity everyone else has already decided is true about you. You are not just afraid of being vulnerable. You are afraid of breaking a promise you never remember making. There is a particular loneliness in being praised for the exact thing that is quietly costing you the most. People are complimenting the wall. No one is asking what it took to build it, or what it's like to live behind it. Permanently on duty, permanently presentable, never once allowed to simply have a hard day without managing everyone else's reaction to it. And the silence keeps getting reinforced because every time you consider showing what's underneath, the exhaustion, the resentment, the fear, you can feel, somewhere in your chest, the risk of losing the one identity that has reliably earned you love. This is what makes the trap so airtight. It isn't guarded by threat anymore. It's guarded by gratitude, yours and everyone else's. People are genuinely grateful. They mean it when they say they don't know what they'd do without you. And that gratitude, sincere as it is, becomes one more reason it feels impossible to stop. Because stopping would mean risking the one form of love you've ever fully trusted. But if the praise was for the performance, what happens to the exhaustion that the performance was built to hide? The exhaustion no one sees because you hide it well. There is a specific kind of tired that has nothing to do with sleep. You can sleep 8 hours and wake up already depleted because the exhaustion isn't physical, it's structural. The accumulated weight of years spent scanning every room for who needs what, managing your own reactions before anyone witnesses them, staying 3 steps ahead of everyone's emotional needs while your own sat at the back of the line, indefinitely postponed. Consider what a normal day asks of you. You wake up already calculating who might need something. You move through conversations half present, one part listening, another scanning for distress signals. You absorb small emotional spikes all day, a friend's frustration, a colleague's anxiety, and metabolize all of it silently, converting it into calm before anyone notices it landed on you. This is not empathy in its healthy form. Healthy empathy has boundaries. It can feel another person's pain and remain rooted in its own experience. What you're doing is closer to emotional labor without wages, a continuous unpaid job of regulating everyone else's nervous system at the direct expense of your own. And here is what makes this exhaustion so hard to name, even to yourself. It doesn't announce itself as exhaustion. It shows up as irritability you can't explain, as flatness on days that should feel fine, as dread before social plans you used to enjoy, because even people you love now register as one more set of needs to manage. As a body aching in places that have nothing to do with injury, because chronic vigilance lives in the body whether you acknowledge it or not. The cruelest part is that this exhaustion has no acceptable outlet. You can't easily say, "I'm exhausted from being strong," because saying it feels like betraying the identity that has kept you safe and loved for as long as you can remember. So the exhaustion stays where everything else has always stayed. Hidden, managed, absorbed alone. And because it's hidden so well, no one offers you what they would instantly offer someone whose struggle was visible. No one checks in the way you check in on everyone else. No one notices, because you've spent years making sure the pattern was undetectable. You built a version of yourself so convincing that even the people who love you most have no idea there's anything underneath it that needs tending. But exhaustion this deep doesn't just disappear because it's hidden well. It has to go somewhere. So where exactly has it been going all this time? Needed instead of known. Here is where the exhaustion has been going. Quietly rerouted into a substitute for the thing you actually want, which is not to be needed. It's to be known. These two things feel similar from the inside. Being needed produces a rush of purpose, of undeniable relevance to another person's life. But being known means someone sees the version of you underneath the usefulness. The tired parts, the uncertain parts. The parts that have nothing to offer and simply want to be there anyway. Most people in this role have almost no experience of that second thing. So they have unconsciously settled for the first because at least the first is available. This substitution explains so much about your relationships, why you gravitate toward people who need rescuing, why you feel a strange discomfort around people who are simply stable, who don't require anything from you, why intimacy feels more accessible through solving someone's problem than through sitting with them in silence, being witnessed without performing anything at all. Being needed is safer than being known because it comes with a built-in guarantee. If you are useful, you are hard to leave. If you are known, there's no guarantee at all. Someone could see the real, unfiltered version of you and decide it isn't enough. Being needed removes that risk because it makes your presence conditional on function rather than on who you are underneath the function. But this substitution has a devastating side effect. Most of your relationships, even the ones that look deeply connected, are built on a foundation that quietly excludes the most vulnerable, uncertain parts of you. People love the helper. People need the fixer. Almost no one has been given access to the person who sometimes doesn't know what they need, who just wants to be held without explaining why, who wants someone else to carry the conversation for once. Notice how that question lands in your body the next time someone asks it sincerely, with nothing attached. Not, "How are you? I need to know if you're okay enough to help me." Just, "How are you?" If your first instinct is a flicker of suspicion, a search for the hidden request underneath, that reaction is not paranoia. It's evidence. A nervous system that has learned, across years, that unconditional attention is rare enough to warrant checking twice before believing it. So if being needed has become a substitute for being known, what happens the moment someone actually needs nothing from you and simply asks how you are? The fear of becoming a burden. Underneath almost every behavior described so far sits one fear, quieter and older than the rest, doing most of the work without ever announcing itself directly. It is the fear of becoming a burden. This fear rarely shows up as a clear thought. It shows up as a reflex, the instinct to say "I'm fine" before you've checked whether you are. The habit of downplaying pain the moment someone asks. The discomfort that rises when you imagine asking a friend for real help, the kind that would require them to show up for you the way you show up for everyone else. This fear was not invented by an anxious mind. It was built by evidence. Somewhere in your history, needing something came at a cost, a withdrawal of warmth, a flicker of irritation, a silence that told you your need had registered as inconvenient. Children are extraordinarily efficient learners when it comes to emotional risk. 1 or 2 confirmations were enough to write the rule permanently. Your needs make you a burden, so manage them alone. The tragedy of this fear is that it doesn't just protect you from rejection, it actively prevents the very thing that could heal it. Connection deepens precisely when people are allowed to need each other, when someone shows up for your mess the way you show up for theirs. If you never risk being a burden, you never get to discover that most people who actually love you do not experience your needs the way your fear insists they will. This fear also distorts your read of other people's patience. You assume a shorter fuse than exists. You edit your feelings down before they arrive, offering a version of your struggle so minimized that people can't fully respond to it, which then reinforces the belief that no one is really available anyway. A loop with no natural exit, built entirely on a prediction you've never actually tested. And here is the quiet cruelty of that loop. The people closest to you sense that something is being withheld, and they interpret the distance as disinterest rather than protection. They don't know you are managing their comfort. They just know something feels slightly closed. There is a moment worth noticing if you can catch it in real time. The instant right before you deflect a question about how you're really doing. In that instant, there is almost always a flash of real feeling, unfiltered, still raw. And then, almost too fast to notice, the edit happens. The raw thing gets translated into something smaller, safer, easier to hand over. That translation is the fear, working exactly as it was trained to. So if this fear has been shaping every interaction from behind the scenes, what would it actually look like to test it, to let someone see you when you are not okay and not managing it? Who are you when no one needs saving? Try for a moment an experiment that sounds simple and is one of the hardest things a person in this role can attempt. Imagine a room with no crisis in it. No one needs fixing. No one needs calming. No one is waiting for you to notice their distress and absorb it. Now ask yourself, who are you in that room? For many people, the honest answer is unsettling. There's a blankness where an identity should be, not because you lack a self, but because the self you built was constructed almost entirely around function, being useful to people who were struggling. Remove the struggle, and the architecture that gave you shape suddenly has nothing to hold on to. This is one of the least discussed costs of the role. An identity built on being needed is only as stable as other people's need for you. Your sense of self has been quietly outsourced, dependent on a continuous supply of problems to solve. When that supply runs low instead of relief, many people feel a strange, disorienting anxiety, as if without something to fix, they don't fully know how to exist. This explains a pattern you may recognize: the way calm periods sometimes feel more unsettling than crises. Crisis gives you a job. Crisis tells you exactly who to be. Peace offers no instructions, and if your identity has never been built around simply existing, unattached to usefulness, peace can feel less like relief and more like free fall. There is a specific grief hiding inside this realization: the grief of noticing that you don't actually know your own preferences outside of what's useful to others. You know what everyone else needs from you in almost any situation. Try instead to answer what you want, with nothing at stake and no one to please, and the answer arrives slowly, uncertainly, like a muscle that hasn't been used in years. This is not a flaw in your character. It's the logical outcome of a life spent orienting around other people's needs as the price of belonging. But naming it clearly is the first real crack in the pattern, because you cannot rebuild a self you have never let yourself locate. Even the small things become evidence of how far this goes. What do you actually want to eat when no one else's preference is in the room? What do you want to do with a free afternoon when there's no one to check on, nothing broken to fix? Many people find these questions almost embarrassingly difficult, not because they are shallow, but because the muscle required to answer them was never given the chance to develop. It atrophied quietly, underneath decades of answering everyone else's version of that question first. So if the identity built on being needed is this fragile, what was actually lost in the years spent building it, and can any of it be recovered? Grieving the person you never got to be. There is a version of you that never got permission to exist, not because anything was wrong with it, but because there was never room for it. That version needed things. It fell apart sometimes and needed someone else to hold the pieces. It got to be inconsistent, uncertain, occasionally the one who needed saving instead of the one who did the saving. That version is not gone. It was simply never given a place to live. This is a real loss, and it deserves to be grieved as one, even though it looks nothing like the losses we usually mourn. No one died. Nothing was taken in a single dramatic moment. What happened was slower and quieter. 1,000 small redirections, each one reasonable on its own, that together added up to an entire self postponed indefinitely. Grief for this loss is disorienting because there's no clear object. You're not mourning a person or an event. You're mourning a possibility, the version of your life where you were allowed to be soft without consequence, where needing something didn't put your belonging at risk, where strength was one option among many instead of the only acceptable way to exist. Many people skip this grief entirely because grieving requires first admitting that something was lost, and admitting that can feel like betraying the very people who needed you to be strong. It can feel like blaming a parent who was doing their best. But grief is not blame. You can hold enormous compassion for the people who shaped this pattern in you and still, simultaneously, mourn what it cost you to survive them. This grief often arrives sideways, disguised as something else. A wave of sadness during a completely ordinary moment. A strange envy towards someone who seems able to fall apart without shame. A lump in the throat while watching someone else be comforted, unearned, simply because they needed comforting. These are not random. They are grief, finally finding a crack to move through. Letting this grief exist, rather than managing it into something productive, is itself a radical act for someone who has spent a lifetime converting feeling into function. For once, the feeling doesn't need to become anything. It just needs to be felt. There is no timeline for this kind of grief. It might surface for a few minutes and recede for months. It might arrive all at once while washing dishes or driving home in silence. None of that makes it less real. Grief for a self that never got to exist doesn't follow the shape of grief for a life that already happened because in some sense it hasn't finished happening yet. It's still available, still possible, which is exactly why it hurts to acknowledge how long it's been waiting. But grief that finally gets acknowledged raises its own question. Once you see clearly what this pattern cost you, what has it cost the people who love you most? The ones standing just outside the wall you built? What this has cost the people closest to you? It is tempting to think this pattern only costs you. It doesn't. The wall you built to protect yourself also keeps out the people who love you, and most of them have felt that distance without ever being able to name its source. Think about the people closest to you and consider an uncomfortable question. How many of them have ever really taken care of you? Not helped with a task, actually taken care of you the way you take care of them, attentively, patiently, without you having to ask twice or perform gratitude to make it easier? If the honest answer is almost no one, that is not a coincidence. It's the direct result of a lifetime spent making yourself extremely hard to take care of. This happens in small, invisible ways. You deflect concern so smoothly that people stop offering it. Your deflection trains them that it isn't wanted. You solve your own problems so quickly that no one ever gets the chance to solve one for you. You show up so reliably for others that asking you to sit still and receive something starts to feel unnatural to everyone involved, including you. Over time, this creates a painful imbalance in your closest relationships. People love you, but they don't fully know you because the version available to be known was always the capable one, never the struggling one. And on some level, many of them sense that something is being withheld. They can't name it. They just know that reciprocity feels slightly off, that you give more than you receive, that closeness with you has an edge they can't quite get past. This also shapes how your relationships end, or nearly end. Partners who eventually feel more managed than loved. Friends who quietly stop reaching out because you never seem to need them to. Family members who lean on you endlessly and never notice, because you never let the noticing happen, that the leaning has become one-sided in a way that is quietly costing you something significant. None of this means the people around you don't love you enough. It means you built a version of intimacy that excludes the very thing intimacy requires, the willingness to be received. not just to give. There is a particular kind of grief that belongs to the people who love you too, even if they never articulate it directly. It's the grief of loving someone who is always present but rarely fully reachable, of sensing an entire dimension of a person that stays permanently out of view. They didn't sign up to love only the competent half of you. They just never got offered the rest. So if the wall protects you and simultaneously starves the people who love you of real access to you, what would it actually take to lower it, even slightly, without the whole identity collapsing? The difference between strength and armor. It is time to separate two things that have been fused together for most of your life. One is strength, the other is armor. And mistaking the second for the first is the single most exhausting error at the center of everything explored so far. Armor is built in a moment of danger, for a specific threat, and it does its job by making a person harder to reach. It doesn't discriminate between attacks and affection. It blocks both equally. That is what armor is designed to do. Armor was never meant to be worn permanently. It was meant to get you through the specific danger it was built for, then come off once the danger passed. Real strength works differently. It is not the absence of need. It's the capacity to hold difficulty without losing yourself, while remaining reachable. A person with real strength can fall apart in front of someone and not experience that as failure, because their worth was never contingent on appearing unbreakable. Real strength has room for softness inside it. Armor has none. This distinction explains why the strong one so often feels depleted rather than empowered. What you've been calling strength has actually been armor, doing armor's job, keeping everyone, including the people who love you most, at a manageable distance while costing you the very connection you've spent your entire life quietly starving for. Consider how differently these two behave under pressure. Armor gets heavier the longer it's worn because it was never designed for daily life, only for emergencies. Real strength grows lighter over time because it isn't fighting against connection, it's built to hold it. That's the tell. If your strength is making you more tired the longer you sustain it, more distant, more isolated inside your own competence, what you're carrying was never strength. It was armor, doing exactly what armor does. This changes the entire question you've been asking yourself. The question was never, how do I become strong enough to stop needing anyone? That question has no answer, and chasing it is what built the exhaustion. The real question, the one this pattern was always avoiding, is simpler and far more frightening. What would it feel like to be strong and reachable at the same time? Removing armor is not becoming fragile. It is becoming strong enough to be reachable. It is discovering that you can be both the person who holds others and the person who occasionally needs to be held, without either canceling out the other. That is not a downgrade. It's the completion of who you've always had the capacity to become. So if strength and armor have finally been separated, what does it actually look like in practice to put the armor down without losing the strength underneath it? Putting the weight down. Putting the armor down does not happen in one dramatic moment. No single conversation or breakthrough undoes years of learning that your needs were too expensive to voice. It happens in small, almost imperceptible acts of risk, repeated until your nervous system gathers new evidence to override the old rule. It starts with something as small as answering, "How are you?" honestly, just once, with someone who has earned a little trust. Not a full confession, not a performance of vulnerability. Just one true sentence offered to see what happens when you don't immediately manage the other person's reaction to it. It continues with noticing, without judgment, the moment your old reflex activates, the instinct to fix, to reassure, to become useful the second someone shows distress. You don't have to override it every time. You only have to notice it, because noticing creates the tiny gap where a different choice becomes possible. Over time, that gap widens. What used to feel automatic starts to feel like an option instead of a command. It grows through allowing someone to help you with something small, even when you don't strictly need it, simply to practice being on the receiving end of care instead of always generating it. This will feel unnatural. It is supposed to. Unfamiliar is not the same as unsafe, even though your body has spent years treating those two things as identical, and it deepens through letting yourself grieve the years spent performing a strength that was never allowed to include softness. That grief is not weakness. It is the final layer of armor finally being acknowledged instead of carried in silence. None of this erases what the pattern gave you. Your attunement, your reliability, your capacity to hold difficult moments steady, these remain real gifts, and they can stay. What changes is what sits underneath them, not a wall anymore, something more like a door, one you open on your own terms, for the people who have earned the right to see what's behind it. That door was never supposed to stay locked to everyone. It was only supposed to keep out the people who never deserved access. And somewhere along the way, it stopped distinguishing between the two. You became the strong one because someone had to be, and it was never going to be anyone else. That was true once. It does not have to stay true forever. There is a version of you who gets to be strong and still be held. That version has been waiting, patiently, for permission that only you can give. The weight was never meant to be carried alone forever. You get to put it down, not all at once, not perfectly. Just one honest sentence, one accepted offer of help, one moment of letting someone see you without editing at first, and then another, until being strong and being reachable finally stop feeling like opposites.